Now then, how you doing? I hope you're well. I love gnarly trees, me, of which I came across a whole bunch of them at Hardcastle Crags near Hebden Bridge recently. They can be something of a challenge to paint though, being as chaotic as they are. I find it's best to just dive on in there with as little preparation as I can get away with and just enjoy the process of exploration and discovery, particularly when it comes to applying textures. This is Hardcastle Crags, a National Trust managed property at Hebden Bridge. Situated in a narrow valley, the location features 400 acres of woodland and a 19th century mill. Hebden water meanders through the property over several tumbling waterfalls and into quiet reflective mill ponds, and there is, of course, the crag itself. When we visited, it was still early in the year, so the only leaves to be seen were those lying thick and dormant on the ground, a callback to the previous autumn. There was a lot to look at and enjoy, but I have to say, on this occasion, it was the trees that particularly caught my eye, of which there were lots of them. It's actually quite an impressive, densely wooded area. All of which brings me to gnarly trees. I love to see them when I'm out and about. I'll walk around them, photograph them, and as I'm doing so I like to plan out how I will probably ultimately paint them. But as you can see from this example, they can be quite complex, so where do you start? Well, a good starting point might be to try drawing them in pencil. After all, drawing out a subject as a preliminary exercise to painting is always a great way to familiarise yourself with any subject. Here I've taken a slightly different approach though. It's a direct, uncompromising approach that might feel like a huge gamble to the uninitiated, but can actually be quite cathartic. Trust me on this. I've mixed up a light green because, surprise surprise, one of the notable properties of the trees in the photo is that they are absolutely covered in green moss. And I've drawn the trees out with the paints, in other words, no preliminary drawing in pencil. And you might be thinking that this is just too difficult, but if you've never done this before, I do recommend you give it a try. I like to start with simple details that give some indication of its basic three-dimensional properties and try to establish the relationships between branches. So if one branch passes in front of another, for instance, then applying a shadow to the one behind is usually enough to create the necessary illusion. And I must admit that even when I start with the simple bits, I soon get wrapped up in it and find myself wanting to add further details as I go along. Well, this is absolutely fine. After all, there are no rules for this. And by the time I get to the darker tones, I'm adding lines and circles almost at random, softening off the edges to blend them into the surrounding wash and generally having a good time. Well, there is just one important thing to consider, however. One little note of caution. It's worth remembering that surface details can help to explain an object's contours. So Use those details to your advantage. Make sure that they curve with the surface of the branch. In that way, the result will look far more three-dimensional and hopefully convincing. And by the same token, we should always take care to avoid any details that might inadvertently contradict those contours. Well, the dark tone I'm using is mixed from French ultramarine and burnt umber, a rich, creamy mix intended to give me maximum intensity. If pushed, I would say that within that mix, the burnt umber is slightly dominant. When I'm running low on it and I have to add more pigment to top it up, it's generally the burnt umber that I reach for as a matter of priority. One of the reasons for this is because when I soften it off with a damp brush, it's the burnt umber that tends to become the most visible on the surface of the paper, which I really like. I like the warmth of the colour. Another important thing to note is how I'm trying to think three-dimensionally. Where I place my dark tone will determine which branches are the closest to us and establish which ones pass in front of or behind those that are adjacent to them. Well, it's a relatively simple technique of applying the dark tone to the branch that is passing underneath another and then softening it off away from the neighbouring branch. I should add that this is also an effective way of grafting new branches onto existing ones. Well, I hope you enjoyed that. Gnarly trees can be somewhat intimidating, but they are heaps of fun to paint. Well, as always, please do hit the like and subscribe buttons, and if you're interested in viewing the full feature-length tutorial from which this has been just a very small extract, along with tons of other full-length uncut demonstrations, then how about becoming a studio member of my YouTube channel? Well, you'll find full details in the description below, along with several other sign-up options. In the meantime, take care, and I'll see you next time.